Stephanie's hands trembled as she bent to pick up the broken pieces, her face burning with shame. Her heart pounded as whispers filled the hall, each word cutting deeper. She thought Alexander would dismiss her on the spot, but something unexpected happened. When her eyes lifted for a moment, she saw not only anger in his gaze but also a flicker of something softer. Conflict, almost as if he was fighting with himself. Still, his pride forced him to turn away. That night, when the guests had left and silence filled the mansion, Stephanie quietly cleaned the mess she had caused. Alone in the grand hall, she felt smaller than ever, but her determination did not break. She told herself she had to stay strong, for her mother's medicine, for her sister's future, and for the promise she made never to give up. Upstairs, Alexander watched her from the balcony. He saw how carefully she picked up every shard, how she refused to complain, even though her hands were scratched. For the first time in years, he felt a pull in his heart, a reminder that beneath his wealth and power, he was still a man capable of feeling. The next morning, Stephanie expected to be fired, but instead, she was given more tasks. Alexander never mentioned the accident again, though his eyes often lingered on her when he thought no one noticed. Slowly, the walls around his heart began to crack. He found himself listening when she spoke politely, watching the way she carried herself with quiet strength. One rainy afternoon, Stephanie carried a tray to his study. She placed the tea gently on the desk, but her tired hands trembled again. Before she could step back, Alexander spoke. His voice was softer than usual. "Sit down." Stephanie froze, unsure if she had heard him correctly. No one sat in his study without permission. She hesitated, then slowly obeyed. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Finally, Alexander looked up from his papers and studied her face. "Why do you work so hard, even when no one notices?" Stephanie's lips parted, her eyes lowering to the floor. "Because my family needs me. My mother is sick, and my sister. She deserves a better life. I can't give up." Her words struck him deeper than she realized. For the first time, Alexander saw more than a maid. He saw a woman of strength, sacrifice, and love. That night, he found himself unable to sleep, replaying her words in his mind. Stephanie's steps were light though her body was tired. She moved from one task to another with quiet determination, never allowing weariness to show. As she polished the grand staircase, she caught sight of Alexander walking through the hall, dressed sharply as always, his face unreadable. She lowered her gaze at once, but even in that fleeting glance, she sensed his eyes lingered on her longer than before. The day stretched on with endless work. Stephanie carried trays, dusted shelves, and handled orders from the other staff. Yet, despite her exhaustion, there was a grace in the way she moved, a strength that made her presence hard to ignore. Alexander noticed it again when she brought fresh flowers into the dining room. Her hands were delicate, arranging each bloom with care, and he found himself staring before quickly turning away. Later that evening, the mansion quieted, and Stephanie walked out to the back garden to catch her breath. The air was cool, and the stars hung brightly above. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a prayer for her mother's healing and for her sister's future. She didn't know Alexander had followed out of habit, his steps taking him to the window that overlooked the garden. From where he stood, he saw her lips move in silent plea, her face lifted to the sky, a mixture of pain and hope etched across it. Something stirred inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, a deep pull that unsettled him. The following day, he tried to bury himself in work, but her image refused to leave his mind. Her defiance when she returned the envelope, her tears in the laundry room, her quiet resilience as she moved through the mansion, all of it clashed with the cold, disciplined life he had built for himself. At lunch, when she placed a dish on his table, their hands brushed by accident. Stephanie quickly pulled back, apologizing softly, but the brief touch sent an unfamiliar warmth through him. He covered it with his usual stern expression, yet his heart beat faster than he liked to admit. For Stephanie, each day was a battle. She endured his moods, his endless demands, and the heavy workload, but she reminded herself of why she was there. She carried her family's burdens in silence, determined not to break. Still, she couldn't shake the memory of the night he had called her by name. The sound of it lingered in her mind, softer than she had ever heard from him, though he quickly masked it with authority. The distance between them was shifting, slowly, almost invisibly. He remained the cold billionaire, and she remained the maid who served in silence, yet beneath that surface, Something fragile and dangerous was beginning to grow. Something neither of them was ready to admit. His silence felt heavier than words. Alexander turned slightly, as though searching for something in the shadows of the room before his gaze returned to her. "Because it's easier," he said finally, his voice low, almost reluctant. Stephanie tilted her head, not fully understanding. He gave a faint, bitter smile. "If you keep people at a distance, they can't disappoint you. They can't betray you." The softness of his confession surprised her. She had never imagined he could speak with such honesty. For a moment, she forgot he was her employer, the untouchable billionaire feared by everyone. In that instant, he was just a man carrying invisible scars. Stephanie lowered her eyes, unsure if she should respond, but the silence between them was strangely comforting. Alexander studied her face, noticing the gentleness in her expression. No one had ever looked at him that way without expecting something in return. Before he could say anything else, there was a knock at the door. He straightened quickly, his mask slipping back into place. "Rest well," he said firmly, turning toward the door. But as he left, Stephanie caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, a quiet struggle, as if he was torn between the man he had built himself to be and the man he once was. When the door shut, she sank against the pillows, her mind racing. She could still hear the weight in his voice, the pain behind his harshness. And though she tried to push the thought aside, her heart whispered a truth she wasn't ready to face. Alexander Williams was not as cold as the world believed. The following morning, Stephanie insisted on returning to work despite the doctor's advice. She felt uneasy staying in the guest suite, as if it placed her closer to Alexander in a way she didn't understand. She dressed in her uniform again, tying her apron with steady hands, determined to prove her strength. Downstairs, the mansion buzzed with quiet activity, though fewer staff remained. Stephanie carried breakfast into the dining room. As she set the plates, she felt a presence behind her. Turning slightly, she saw Alexander at the doorway. His sharp eyes swept the room, then landed on her. For once, there was no cold command on his lips. Instead, he gave the faintest nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that unsettled her more than his scolding ever had. Her heart raced as she lowered her gaze and returned to her duties, unaware that he continued to watch her, his thoughts tangled and restless. Something inside him was shifting, and he knew it was because of her. The laughter died at once, leaving only stunned silence. Every eye in the glittering hall turned toward Alexander. His tone had been calm, but it carried such finality that no one dared make another joke. Stephanie stood frozen, her tray trembling in her hands. Her breath caught as the words echoed in her mind. "I have fallen for her." Whispers spread quickly among the guests, sharp and cutting. Some women gasped in disbelief, others exchanged sly glances, and a few men smirked as if waiting for Alexander to take back his words. But he did not. He stood tall, his gaze steady, his expression unshaken. It was the first time in years that Alexander Williams didn't care what society thought of him. Stephanie's cheeks burned. She lowered her head, wishing desperately to disappear. Yet a part of her heart beat wildly, each thump reminding her of the truth in his voice. Alexander had said it openly, without shame. For her. One of the older businessmen coughed awkwardly, trying to lighten the tension. "Come now, Alex. Surely you're only joking. A maid." But Alexander's eyes narrowed, sharp as steel. "I never joke about what matters." His words were like a warning, and no one dared to challenge him again. The music resumed, though the air in the room had shifted. People pretended to continue their conversations, but their eyes still flicked toward Stephanie. She felt smaller than ever, trapped in a world where she didn't belong. She slipped out of the hall, her heart racing, her hands cold. Minutes later, Alexander found her in the garden, standing under the glow of lanterns. She gripped the edge of the stone fountain, her shoulders trembling. He approached quietly, his footsteps soft against the gravel. "You heard me," he said, his voice low but firm. Stephanie turned, her eyes wide. "Why would you say that? In front of everyone?" Her voice shook. "Now they'll laugh at you. At me. Don't you see what you've done?" He stepped closer, closing the space between them. "Let them laugh. Their opinions mean nothing to me." "But I'm just," she began, but he cut her off. "Don't say that. Don't ever call yourself just anything. You are more than they will ever understand." His words were fierce, but his eyes were soft, searching hers with a tenderness she had never seen before. Stephanie's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, but fear clouded her heart. You don't know what you're saying. We come from different worlds. You're Alexander Williams. And you're the only one who's ever seen me as a man, not as a fortune, he interrupted. Do you think I care about anything else? Her lips parted, but no words came out. She could only stare at him, torn between fear and something far stronger, the feeling she had tried to bury. Alexander's hand lifted slightly, as though he wanted to touch her, then fell back at his side. His jaw clenched. You don't have to answer now. But remember this, what I said tonight wasn't a mistake. I meant it. With that, he turned and walked back toward the mansion, leaving Stephanie under the lantern light, her heart racing, her world turned upside down. The hall went still, every whisper silenced as Alexander crossed the room. He took the tray from Stephanie's trembling hands, his gaze never leaving hers. She is not just a maid, he said firmly. She is stronger than anyone I've ever known. She is brave, honest, and works harder than all of you could ever imagine. Her heart is worth more than every jewel in this room. If that makes me a fool, then I will gladly be one. Stephanie's breath caught. Her heart raced so fast she thought it might burst. Could this be real? Then his voice softened. Stephanie, I tried to fight it, but I can't anymore. I love you. Tears welled in her eyes. For so long, she had hidden her feelings, convinced they could never belong in the same world. But hearing those words, she could no longer hold back. She threw herself into his arms, clinging to him with everything she had. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Alexander didn't care. He cupped her face gently and kissed her, not as a man flaunting power, but as someone who had finally found the part of himself he had been missing. The room filled with applause, but hidden among the cheers, one pair of eyes glared with quiet malice, masking a resentment that would soon surface. After the party, Alexander and Stephanie grew closer. They shared long talks, moments of laughter, and brief silences that spoke louder than words. Whenever her work was done, he sought her out. Whenever he was free, she found herself drawn to him. For the first time in her life, Stephanie felt what love truly was. But happiness never stayed untouched. One evening, Alexander sat in his study when his assistant handed him an envelope. Inside were photographs of Stephanie. Images twisted to look far worse than reality. They showed her carrying trays of drinks in an adult club, staged to paint her in a shameful light. His chest tightened, every old wound inside him reopening at once. Betrayal, lies, heartbreak, it all came flooding back. His mind whispered that she was no different from the rest. The door creaked open. Stephanie walked in, smiling faintly, holding a basket of flowers for the vase on his desk. She stopped when she saw his face. His eyes were hard, colder than she had seen in months. On the desk lay the photographs, spread out like evidence in a trial. Explain this, Alexander demanded. Her heart dropped. She stepped closer, her face pale with shock. Alex, this isn't what it looks like. Then what is it? His tone was flat, but his clenched fists betrayed his fury. I trusted you. Was this all just a lie? Tears blurred her vision. Please, listen to me. Yes, I worked there, but only as a waitress. I never danced, never sold myself, never gave away my dignity. My mother was sick. We had nothing, and I needed the money for her medicine. The moment I found another job, I left that place and never looked back. That's the truth. I swear it. Her words spilled out with desperate honesty, but his face stayed hard as stone. Everyone has a story. Everyone has excuses. You're no different. The words struck her like a blade. Her voice trembled, but anger broke through the pain. After everything I've shared with you, after all we've been through, do you really believe I'm like the rest? The silence that followed was unbearable. Stephanie no longer saw the man who had opened his heart to her. She saw only the cold, ruthless Alexander she had first met. She went through her chores that evening in silence, each glance from him a reminder that he no longer believed in her. By midnight, she sat on the edge of her bed, her pillow soaked with tears. Her body had no more left to give, but her heart carried the weight of his doubt. She loved him, deeply, painfully, but she could not stay where she was no longer trusted. With trembling hands, she wrote her resignation. I cannot work for someone who refuses to believe in me. I came here to earn an honest living, not to be shamed for the past I could not control. Goodbye, Alexander. The next morning, her room was empty. Her belongings were gone. On his desk lay the folded letter, waiting like a wound. When Alexander read her words, something inside him cracked. Fear clawed at his chest, but he forced it down, whispering to himself the lie he wanted to believe, that she was just like the rest. For days, Alexander could not focus. The mansion felt hollow without Stephanie's soft humming in the halls or her gentle knock before bringing him tea. He told himself she was only another servant who had left, but each time he passed her empty room, the ache in his chest deepened. One afternoon, his assistant entered the study. "Sir, about Miss Stephanie." Alexander's head snapped up. "What about her?" Mr. Howard set a folder on the desk. "You should see this." "I looked into those photographs." Alexander's hands shook as he opened it. Inside was the truth. Stephanie had worked at that club only one night. Desperate, she had begged for advance payment to cover her mother's treatment. She never returned, and witnesses confirmed it. His throat tightened as guilt struck him like a storm. Her tearful eyes, her broken voice, her desperate words, "Do you really believe I'm like them?" echoed in his mind. He had crushed the only woman who cared for him without wanting anything in return. Alone in the study, staring at her resignation note, Alexander realized that wealth and power had left him with nothing but emptiness. What he truly needed was her. He tried calling, but her phone was off. He sent his driver to her old apartment, but she had moved. Restless, he went himself to the neighborhood where she once lived. An elderly woman selling fruit told him kindly, "She's at the hospital every day. Her mother's health worsened, and they admitted her." Without another word, Alexander drove straight there. He found Stephanie outside the ward, exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, yet still radiant in her quiet strength. For a long moment, he just stood, then gathered his courage. "Stephanie." Her head lifted sharply. For a second, her eyes softened, then turned cold. She rose. "Why are you here?" "I owe you an apology," his voice cracked. "I didn't believe you when I should have. I let fear and my past blind me. I hurt you." She crossed her arms, trembling with anger. "Hurt me? You destroyed my trust. I told you the truth, and you threw it back at me." "I know," he whispered. "I hate myself for it. I learned the truth. You worked there one night, for your mother. I was wrong, Stephanie. Terribly wrong." Tears filled her eyes. She turned away. "Do you know what it feels like to open your heart only to be judged?" "Yes," he admitted, stepping closer. "That's why I built walls. But you broke through them, and I panicked. I let fear ruin us. I don't want to lose you." Her voice shook. "Words are easy, Alexander. Trust is harder." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "Then let me show you. I've already paid for your mother's treatment. Not from pity, not because I expect anything, but because you deserve better. I will prove myself, not once but every day, until you believe me. Because I love you, Stephanie. With everything I am." Her lips trembled. She wanted to resist, but her heart betrayed her. Tears spilled as a broken smile appeared. "You're such a stubborn man, Alexander." She stepped into his arms, and he held her as though he would never let go. "I am so sorry," he whispered, words he hadn't spoken in years. After that night, everything changed. He began visiting her mother's ward, sometimes with flowers, other times only to sit beside her and hold her hand. Stephanie tested him at first, unsure if his change was real, but day by day, his actions spoke louder than his promises. One evening as they walked outside the hospital, she asked softly, "Why are you doing all this?" He looked at her. "Because I can't watch you carry everything alone. Let me share the weight." For the first time since their pain, she smiled at him again. They spent more time together, not in glittering places but in simple moments. He took her to a small bakery from his childhood, telling her how he once couldn't afford bread. She showed him her sketchbook filled with drawings she made after long days of work. "I wanted to study art," she admitted quietly. "But life had other plans." His friends still mocked him, one even insisting she cared only about his money. This time, Alexander stood firm. I would rather lose every dollar than lose her. He later told Stephanie about the lies, the photos, and how he had cut those people from his life. She held his hand gently. You've changed, Alexander. He touched her cheek. No. You changed me. Months later, he arranged a small dinner at the mansion, not with glitter and glamour, but with family and true friends. As drinks was served, Alexander's heart pounded. He stood, walked to Stephanie, and before she could react, sank to one knee. Gasps filled the room. Stephanie, he said, voice trembling. You came into my life when I least expected it. You taught me love, trust, and kindness. I don't care what the world thinks. I care only about you. Will you marry me? Her tears fell freely, her smile radiant. Yes, Alexander. 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her, not as a billionaire claiming his maid, but as a man who had found his home in her heart. From that day forward, they wrote a new story. A love stronger than pride, wealth, or fear. A story proving that honesty and hard work shine brightest, that kindness endures even in hardship, and that true love cannot be bought with money.